-50, and counting. He dozed a little, but could not sleep. Darkness was almost full when he heard Elton's heavy tread on the stairs again, and Richard swung his feet onto the floor with relief. When he knocked and stepped in, Richard saw that Parkins had changed into a tent-like sports shirt and a pair of jeans. "I did it," he said. "It's in the park." "Will it be stripped?" "No," Elton said. "I have a gadget, a battery, and 2 alligator chips. If anyone puts a hand or a crowbar on it, he'll get a shock and a short blast of a siren. Works good. I built it myself." He seated himself with a heavy sigh. What's this about Cleveland?" Richards demanded. It was easy, he found, to demand of Elton. Parkes shrugged. "Oh, he's a fellow like me. I met him once in Boston at the library with Bradley, our little pollution club. I suppose Mum said something about that." He rubbed his hands together and smiled unhappily. "She said something," Richard agreed. "She's a little dim," Parkes said. "She doesn't understand much of what's been happening for the last 20 years or so. She's frightened all the time. All she said, I'm all she has." "Will they catch Bradley?" "I don't know. He's got quite a intelligence network." His eyes slipped away from Richard's. "You—" The door opened, and Mrs. Parkes stood there. Her arms were crossed, and she was smiling, but her eyes were haunted. "I've called the police," she said. "Now you'll have to go." Elton's face drained to a pearly, white, yellowish. "You're lying." Richards lurched to his feet and paused, his head cocked, a listening gesture. Faintly, rising, the sound of sirens. "She's not lying," he said. A sickening sense of futility swept him. "Back to square one. Take me to my car." "She's lying," Elton insisted. He rose, almost touched Richards's arm, then withdrew his hand, as if the other man might be hot to touch. "They're fire trucks. Take me to my car, quick." The sirens were becoming louder, rising and falling, wailing. The sound filled Richards with a dreamlike horror, locked in here with 2 crazies, while— "Mother!" His face was twisted, beseeching. "I called them," she blatted, and seized one of her son's bloated arms as if to shake him. "I had to, for you. That man has got you all mixed up. We'll say he broke in, and we'll get the reward money." "Come on," Elton grunted to Richards, and tried to shake free of her, but she clung stubbornly, like a small dog bedeviling a Picheron. "I had to. You've got to stop this radical business, Eltie. You've got to—" "Eltie!" he screamed. "Eltie!" And he flung her away. She skidded across the room and fell across the bed. "Quick," Elton said, his face full of terror and misery. "Oh, come quick." They crashed and blundered down the stairs and out the front door, Elton breaking into gigantic, quivering trots. He was beginning to pant again. And upstairs, filtering both through the closed window and open door downstairs, Mrs. Parkes' scream rose to a shriek and met with mixed and blended with the approaching sirens. "I did it for you!" -49, and counting. Their shadows chased them down the hill towards the park, waxing and waning as they approached, and past each of the mesh-enclosed GA street lamps. Elton Parkes breathed like a locomotive, in huge, windy gulps and hisses. They crossed the street, and suddenly headlights picked them out on the far side, a walk in hard relief. Blue lighting flashed, blazed on as a police car came screeching, jamming to a halt 100 yards away. "Richards! Ben Richards!" Gigantic megaphone booming voice. "Your car? Up ahead. See?" Elton panted. Richards could just make the car out. Elton had parked it well under a copse of run-to-seed birches trees near the pond. The cruiser suddenly screamed into life again, rear tires bonding hot rubber to the pavement in lines of acceleration, its gasoline-powered engine wailing in climbing revolutions. It slammed up over the curb, headlights skyrocketing, and came down directly at them. Richard's oh, what a bad boy. Sorry, I've got to fix that. I'll be back in 2 wee seconds. Sorry about that. Where do we get to? Richards turned towards it, suddenly feeling very cool, feeling almost numb. He dragged Bradley's pistol out of his pocket, still backing up. The rest of the cops weren't in sight, just this one. The car screamed at them across the October bare ground of the park. Self-sealing rear tires digging out great clods of ripped black earth. He squeezed off 2 shots at the windshield. It's, uh, it starred, but did not shatter. He leapt aside, the last second, and rolled. Dry grass against his face. Up on his knees, he fired twice more at the back of the car, and when it was coming around in a hard, slewing power turn, blue lights turned on and turned the night into a crazy, shallow, leaping nightmare. The cruiser was between him and the car, but Elton had leapt the other way and was now working frantically to remove his electrical device from the car door. Someone was halfway out of the passenger side of the police car, which was on its way again. A thick, stuttering sound filled the dark. Sten gun. Bullets dug through the turf, around him in a senseless pattern. Dirt struck his cheeks, pattered against his forehead. He knelt as if praying, and fired into the windshield. This time, the bullet punched a hole through the glass. The car was on top of him. He sprang to the left, and the reinforced steel bumper struck his left foot, snapping his ankle and sending him sprawling on his face. The cruiser's engine rose to a supercharged scream, digging through another power turn. Now the headlights were on him again, turning everything stark monochrome. Richards tried to get up, but his broken ankle wouldn't support him. Sobbing in great gulps of air, he watched the police car loom again. Everything became highlighted, surreal. He was living in an adrenaline delirium, and everything seemed slow, deliberate, orchestrated. The approaching police car was little but a huge, blind buffalo. The Sten gun rattled again, and this time a bullet punched through his left arm, knocking him sideways. The heavy car tried to veer into him, and for a moment he had a clear shot of the figure behind the wheel. He fired once through the window, and it blew inward. The car screamed to a slow, digging sidewards roll, and then went up and over, crashing down on the roof and then onto its side. The motor stalled, and in sudden, shocking silence, the police radio cracked clearly. Richards could not get to his feet, so he began to crawl toward the car that Paracas was in now. than he was trying to start, but in his blind panic, he must have forgotten to lever the safety vents open, and each time he turned the key, there was only a hollow, coughing boom of air in the chambers. The night began to fill up with converging sirens. He was still 50 yards from the car when Elton realized what was wrong and yanked down the vent lever. The next time he turned the key, the engine chopped erratically into life and the car swept toward Richards. He got into a half-standing position and tore the passenger door open and fell inside. Brackus banked left to Route 77, which intersected State Street above the park. The lower deck of the car no more than an inch from the paving, almost low enough to drag and spill them. Elton gulped in huge swatches of air and let them out with a force enough to flap his lips like window blinds. 2 more police cars screamed around the corner behind them. The blue lights flashed on as they gave chase. "We're not fast enough," Elton screamed. "We're not fast. They're on our wheels." Richards yelled back. "Cut through that vacant lot." The air car banked left, and they were slammed upward violently as they crossed the curb. The battering air pressure shoved them into drive. The police car swelled behind them, and then they were shooting. Richards heard the steel fingers punching holes in the body of their car. The rear window blew in with tremendous crash, and they were sprinkled with fragments of safety glass. Screaming, Elton whipped the air car left and right. One of the police cars, doing 60 plus, lost it coming over the curb. The car veered wildly, revolving blue dome lights, splitting the darkness with lunatic bolts of light, and then crashed over onto its side, digging a hot groove through the littered, empty lot until a spark struck its peeled back gas tank and exploded whitely like a road flare. The second car was following the road again, but Elton beat them. They had cut the cruiser off, but would gain back the lost distance very shortly. The gas-driven around cars were nearly 3 times faster than the air drive, and if an air car tried to go too far off-road, the uneven surface behind the thrusters would flip the car right over, as Brackus nearly flipped them crossing the curb. "Turn right," Richards cried. Brackus pulled them around in another grinding, stomach-churning turn. They were on Route 1. Ahead, Richards could see that they would be forced up into the entranceway of the Coast Turnpike. No evasive action would be possible here. Only death would be possible there. Turn off, goddammit, that alley. For a moment the police car was one turn behind them, then lost from view. No, no, Brackus was gibbering now. We'll be like rats in a trap. Richards leaned over and hauled the wheel around, knocking Elton's hand from the, the throttle with the same gesture. The car skidded around in nearly 90-degree turn, and they bounced off the concrete of the building on the far left of the alley's mouth, sending them in at a crooked angle. The blunt nose of the car struck a pile of heaped trash, garbage cans, and splintered crates. Behind these, solid brick. Richards was pitched violently into the dashboard as they crashed, and his nose broke with a sudden snap, gushing blood with violent force. The air car lay askew in the alley. One cylinder was still coughing a little. Brackus was a silent lump, lolling over his steering wheel. There was no time for him yet. Richard slammed his shoulder against the crimped passenger door. It popped open, and he hopped on one leg to the mouth of the alley. He reloaded his gun from the crumpled box of shells Bradley had supplied him with. They were greasy, cool to the touch. He dropped some of them around his feet. His arm had begun to throb like an ulcerated tooth, making him feel sick and nauseated with pain. Headlights turned the deserted city expressway from night to sunless day. The cruiser skidded around the turn, rear tires fighting for traction, sending up pardon me, sending up the fragrant smell of seared rubber. Looping black marks scored the expansion joint. Macadam in Parabolus. Then it was leaping forward again. Richards held the gun in both hands, leaning against the building to his left. In a moment, they would realize they could see no tail lights ahead. The cop riding shotgun would see the alley. No. Snuffling blood through his broken nose, he began to fire. The range was nearly point blank at this distance. The high-powered slugs smashed through the bulletproof glass as if it had been paper. Each recoil of heavy pistol pulsed through his wounded arm, making him scream. The car roared up over the curb, flew a short, wingless distance, and crashed over the blank wall across the street. Echo free, freebie repair, the faded sign on the wall read. Because you watch it, we won't botch it. The police car was still a foot above the ground. It met brick and wall at high speed and exploded. But the others were coming. Always others. Panting, Richards made his way back to the car. His good leg was very tired. I'm hurt, Paracas was groaning hollowly. I'm hurt so bad. Where's Mum? Where's my mamma? Richards fell on his knees, wriggled under the air car on his back, and began to pull trash and debris from the air chambers like a madman. Blood ran down his cheeks from his ruptured nose, pooling beside his ears. Minus 48, and counting. The car would only run for 5 of his 6 cylinders, and would go no faster than 40, leaning drunkenly to one side. Paracas directed him from the passenger seat, where Richards had manhandled him. The steering column had gone to his abdomen like a real spike, and Richards thought he was dying. The blood on the dented steering wheel was warm and sticky on Richard's palms. I'm very sorry, Paracas said. Turn left here. It's really my fault. I should have known better. She doesn't think straight. She doesn't. He coughed up a glut of thick, black blood and spat it listlessly onto his lap. The sirens filled the night, and they were far behind and off to the west. They had gone out Marginal Way, and from there Paracas had directed him onto the back roads. Now they were on Route 9 going north, and the Portland suburbs were petering out into October barren scrub countryside. The strip lumbers had been through here like locusts, and the end result was a bewildering tangle of second growth and marsh. Do you know where you're telling me to go? Richards asked. He was a huge uh, he was a huge brand of pain from one end to the other. He was quite sure his ankle had broken. There was no doubt at all about his nose. His breath came through it in a flattened gasp. To a place I know, Elton Paracas said, and coughed up more blood. She used to tell me a boy's best friend is his mum. Can you believe that? I used to believe it. Will they hurt her? Take her to jail? No, Richard said shortly, not knowing if they would or not. It was 20 minutes to 8. He and Elton had left the Blue Door at 10 minutes past 7. It seemed as if decades had passed. In a distance far off, more sirens were joining in the general chorus, the unspeakable in pursuit of the inedible, Richards thought disjointedly. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. He had dispatched 2 police cars single-handedly, another bonus for Sheila, blood money, and Kathy. Would Kathy sicken and die on milk paid for with bounty cash? How are you, my darlings? I love you, here on this twisting, crazy back road flit, only for deer jacks and couples looking for a make-out spot. I love you and wish that your dreams be sweet. I wish. Turn left, Elton croaked. Richard swung up a smooth, tarred road that cut through a tangle of denuded sumac and elm, pine and spruce, scrubby nightmare, second growth. A river ripe with sulphurous and industrial waste smote his nose. Low-hanging branches scraped the roof of his car with skeleton screeches. They passed a sign which read, Super Pine Tree Mall, under construction. Keep out. Trespassers will be prosecuted. They topped a final rise, and there was a huge Super Pine Tree Mall. Work must have stopped at least 2 years ago, Richards thought, and things hadn't been too advanced when they did. The place was a maze, a rat warren of half-built stores and shops, discarded lengths of pipe, pipes of cinder block and boards, shacks and rusted shops, all overgrown with scrubby junipers and laurels and witch grass and blue spruce, blackberry and blackthorn, devil's paintbrush and denuded goldenrod, and it stretched on for miles, gaping, oblong, foundation holes like graves dug for Roman gods, rusted skeleton steel, cement walls with steel core rods producing like shadowy cryptograms, bulldozed oblongs that were to be parking lots now grassed over. Somewhere overhead, an owl flew on stiff, noiseless wings, hunting. Help me into the driver's seat. You're in no condition to drive, Richard said, pushing hard on his door to open it. It's the least I can do, Elton Paracus said with grave and bloody absurdity. I'll play hare, drive as long as I can. No, Richard said. Let me go, he screamed at Richards, his fat, baby face terrible and grotesque. I'm dying, and you better let me go. Go, go. And he trailed off into hideous silent coughs that brought up fresh gouts of blood. It smelled very moist in the car, like a slaughterhouse. Help me, he whispered. I'm far too fat to do it by myself. Oh God, please help me do this. Richards helped him. He pushed and heaved, and his hands slipped and squelched in Elton's blood. The front seat was an abattoir, and Elton, who would have thought anyone had had so much blood in him, continued to bleed. When he was wedged behind the steering wheel and the car was rising jaggedly, turning, the brake lights blinked on and off, and the car bunted at trees lightly before Elton found the road out. Richard thought he could hear a crash, but there was none. The erratic thumpa-thumpa-thumpa of the air cylinders grew fainter, beating in the deadly, one-cylinder flat rhythm that would burn out the others in an hour or so. The sound faded. There was no sound at all but the faraway buzz of a plane. Richards realized, belatedly, that he had left the crutches and purchases for disguise purposes in the back of the car. The constellations whirled indifferently overhead. He could see a small, frozen puffs. That was his breath. It was colder tonight. He turned from the road and plunged into the jungle of the construction site. Minus 47, and counting. He spied a pile of cast-off insulation lying at the bottom of a cellar hole and climbed down, using the protruding rods for handholds. He found a stick and pounded the insulation to scare out the rats. He was rewarded with nothing but a thick, fibrous dust that made him sneeze and yelp with the pain burst in his badly used nose. No rats. All the rats were in the city. He uttered a harsh bray of laughter that sounded jagged and splintered in the big dark. He wrapped himself in strips of the insulation. He looked more like a human igloo, but it was warm. He leaned back against the wall and fell into a half-doze. When he roused fully, it was late noon. No more than a cold scrap of light hung over the eastern horizon. He was still alone. There were no sirens. It might have been 3 o'clock. His arm throbbed uneasily, but the flow of blood had stopped on its own. He saw, after pulling his arm out of the insulation, that brushing the fibres gently away from his clot, the Sten gun bullet had apparently ripped a fairly large triangular hunk of meat from the side of his arm, just below his elbow. He supposed he was lucky the bullet hadn't smashed the bone, but the ankle throbbed with a steady, deep ache. The foot itself felt strange, ethereal, barely attached. He supposed the break could be splinted. Supposed. He dozed again. When he woke, his head was clearer. The moon was risen halfway into the sky, but there was no sign of dawn, true or false. He was forgetting something. It came to him in a nasty, jolting realization. He had to mail 2 tape clips before noon. If they were to get the games building, or if they were to get to the games building by the 6:30 airtime, that meant travelling or defaulting the money. But Bradley was on the run or captured, and Elton Paracas had never given him the Cleveland name. And his ankle was broken. Something large, a deer, weren't they extinct in the east, suddenly crashed through the underbrush off to his right, making him jump. Insulation slid off him like snakes, and when he pulled it back around himself miserably, snuffling through his broken nose. He was a city dweller, sitting in a deserted development, gone back to the wild, in the middle of nowhere. The night suddenly seemed alive and malevolent, frightening all on its own, full of crazed bumps and creaks. Richard breathed through his mouth, considering his options and the consequences. Number 1, do nothing. Just sit here and wait for things to cool off. Consequence? The money was piling up. $100 an hour. It would be cut at 6 tonight. He would be running for free, but the hunt wouldn't stop, even if he managed to avoid them for a whole 30 days. The hunt would continue until he was carried off on a board. Option 2, mail the clips to Boston. It couldn't hurt Bradley or the family because their cover was already blown. Consequences? 1, the tapes would undoubtedly be sent to Harding by the hunters watching Bradley's mail, but 2, they would still be able to trace him directly to wherever he'd mailed the tapes from, with no intervening Boston postmark. Option 3, mail the tapes directly to the Games building in Harding. Consequences? The hunt would go on, but would probably be recognised in any town big enough to command a mailbox. They were all lousy choices. Thank you, Mrs. Paracas, thank you. He got up, brushing the insulation away, and tossed the useless head bandage on top of it. As an afterthought, he buried it in the insulation. He began hunting around for something to use as a crutch. The irony of leaving the real crutches in the car struck him again, and when he found a board that reached approximately his armpit height, he threw it over the lip of the cellar foundation and began to climb laboriously back up the core rods. When he got to the top, sweating and shivering simultaneously, he realized he could see his hands. The first faint grey light of dawn began to probe the darkness. He looked longingly at the deserted development, thinking, it would have made such a fine hiding place. No good. He wasn't supposed to be a hiding man. He was a running man. Wasn't that what kept things up, the ratings up? A cloudy, cataract-like ground mist was creeping slowly through the denuded trees. Richards paused to get his directions, and then struck off towards the woods that bordered the abandoned supermall on the north rather. He paused only once to wrap his coat around the top of his crutch, and then continued. -46, and counting. It had been full daylight for 2 hours, and Richards had almost convinced himself he was going around in circles when he heard, through the rank brambles and the grounds brushed up ahead, the whine of air cars. He pushed on cautiously, then peered out on the 2-lane macadam highway. Cars rushed to and fro with fair regularity. About a mile up ahead, Richards could make out a cluster of houses and what was either an air station or an old general store with pumps out the front. He pushed on, paralleling the highway, falling over occasionally. His face and hands were needlepoint of blood and briars and brambles, and his clothes were studded with brown sticker balls. He'd given up trying to brush them away. Burst milkweed pods floated lightly from his shoulders, making him look as if he had been in a pillow fight. He was wet from top to toe. He'd made it through the first of his two brooks, but on the third his quote, crutch had slipped on the treacherous bottom and he'd fallen headlong. The camera was, of course, undamaged. It was waterproof and shockproof. The bushes and trees were thinning. Richards got down on his hands and knees and crawled. When he'd gone as far as he had thought he could safely, he studied the situation. He was on a slight rise of land, a peninsula of the scrubby second growth weeds that he'd walked through. Below him was the highway, a number of ranch type houses and store with air pumps. The car was in there now, being attended to while the driver, a man in a suede windbreaker, chatted with the air jockey. Beside him, along with 3 or 4 gumball machines and a Mary Jane vendor, stood a blue and red mailbox. It was only 200 yards away. Looking at it, Richards realized bitterly that if he'd arrived before first light, he could have probably done his business unseen. Well, spilt milk and all that. Best laid plans of mice and men. He withdrew until he could set up his camera to do the taping without being seen. "Hello, all you wonderful people out there in Freevee land," he began. "This is jovial Ben Richards, taking you on my annual nature hike. If you look closely, you may see the fearless scarlet tanager, or a great speckled cowbird, perhaps even a yellow-bellied pig or bird or two." He paused. "They may let that part through, but not the rest. If you're deaf and read lips, remember what I'm saying. Tell a neighbor or a friend. Spread the word. The network is poisoning the air you breathe and denying you the cheap protection because—" He recorded the tapes and put them in his pants pockets. Okay, what next? The only possible way to do it was to go down with the gun drawn, deposit the tapes, and run. He would steal a car. It wasn't as if they were going to know where he was anyway. Randomly, he wondered how far Paracas had gotten before they'd cut him down. He had the gun out and in his fist when he heard the voice, startlingly close, seemingly in his left ear. "Come on, Rolf." There was a sudden volley of barks that made Richards jump violently, and he had just time to think, "Police dogs. Christ, they've got police dogs," when something huge and black broke cover and arrowed at him. The gun was knocked into the brush, and Richards was on his back. The dog was on top of him, a big German shepherd with a generous streak of mongrel, lapping his face and drooling on his shirt. His tail flagged back and forth vigorously in semaphores of joy. "Rolf! Hey, Rolf! Oh, God!" Richards caught an obscured glimpse of running jeans and running legs and blue jeans. When a small boy was then a small boy was dragging the dog away. "Geez, I'm sorry, mister. Geez, he don't bite. He's too dumb to bite. He's just friendly. He ain't. God, ain't you a mess? You get lost?" The boy was holding Rolf by the collar and staring at Richards with frank interest. He was a good-looking boy, well made, perhaps 11, and even then there was none of the pale, patched inner city on his face. There was something suspicious and alien in his features, yet familiar too. After a moment Richards placed it. It was innocence. "Yes," he said dryly, "I got lost." "Gee, you must have fallen around some." "That I did, pal. You want to take a closer look at my face and see if it's scratched up very badly? I can't see, you know. The boy leaned forward obediently and scanned Richard's face. No sign of recognition flickered there. Richard was satisfied. It's all Burcott, the boy said. There was a delicate New England twang to his voice, not exactly down east, but lightly springy, sardonic. But you'll live, his brow furrowed. Brow furrowed. You escaped from Thomason? I know you ain't from Pineland, 'cause you don't look stupid. I'm not escaped from anywhere, Richard said, wondering if that was a lie or the truth. I was hitching. Bad habit, pal. Never do it, do you? No way, the boy said earnestly. There's crazy dudes running all over the roads these days. That's what my dad says. He's right, Richard said. But I just had to get to, he snapped his fingers in a pantomime of it just slipped to my mind. You know, Jetport. You must mean Voigtfield. That's it. Geez, that's over 100 miles from here, mister. In Derry. I know, Richard said ruefully, and ran a hand over Rolf's fur. The dog rolled over obediently and played dead. Richard's fought an urge to utter a morbid chuckle. I picked up a ride in New Hampshire, and these three maggots, real tough guys, beat me up, stole my wallet, and dumped me in some deserted shopping centre. Yeah, I know that place. Cripes, you want to come down to my house and have some breakfast? I'd like to, bucko, but time's a wasting. I have to get to Jetport by tonight. You gonna hitch another lift? The boy's eyes were round. Got to. Richard started to get up, and then settled back as if it was a great idea that had struck him. Listen, do me a favour. I guess so, the boy said cautiously. Richards took out the two exposed clip tapes. These are charge plate crash vouchers, he said glibly. If you drop them in the mailbox for me, my company will have a lump of cash waiting for me in Derry, and I'll be on my merry way. Even without an address? Uh, these go direct, Richard said. Sure, okay. There's a mailbox down at Gerald's store. He got up, his inexperienced face unable to distinguish the fact that he thought Richards was lying in his teeth. Lying in his teeth. Come on, Rolf. He let the boy get 15 feet and then said, No, come here again. The boy turned and came back with his feet dragging. There was dread on his face. Of course, there was enough holes in Richard's story to drive a truck through. I've got to tell you everything, I guess, Richard said. I was telling you the truth, most of it, pal, but I didn't want to risk the chance that you might blab. The morning October sun was wonderfully warm on the back of his neck, and he wished he could stay on the hill all day and sleep sweetly in fall's fugitive warmth. He pulled the gun from where it had fallen and let it lie loosely on the grass. The boy's eyes went wide. Government, Richard said quietly. Jesus, the boy whispered. Rolf sat beside him, his pink tongue lolling rakishly from the side of his mouth. I'm after some pretty hard guys, kid. You can see they worked me over pretty well. Those clips there have got to get through. I'll mail 'em, the boy said breathlessly. Geez, wait till I tell. Nobody, Richard said. Tell nobody for 24 hours. There might be reprisals, he said ominously. So until tomorrow, this time, you never saw me, understand? Yeah, sure. Then get on it, and thanks, pal. He let out his hand, and the boy shook it awfully. Richards watched him trot down the hill, a boy in a red plaid shirt with his dog, crashing joyfully through the goldenrod beside him. Why can't my Kathy have something like that? His face twisted into a terrifying and wholly unconscious grimace of rage and hate. He might have cursed God himself if a better target had not uh, interposed itself on the dark screen of his mind. The Games Federation, and behind that, like the shadow of a darker god, the network. He watched until he saw the boy, had made a tiny distance, dropped the tapes into the mailbox. Then he got up stiffly. propping his crutch under him, and crashed back into the brush, angling toward the road. The jetport then, and maybe someone else would pay some dues before it was all over. And we'll leave it there. Sorry about all the spluttering through that, because I'm still not quite over COVID. But we did well. That was a few interesting chapters, wasn't it? But thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.